At my brother's wedding, everyone smiled as though the world was perfect except me. Virginia's sunlight lacquered the resort lawn while lilies worked like a velvet choke. A string quartet scattered cheerful notes across sweating glassware. Servers in black orbited the bar. I moved among them without weight seen and not counted. Richard, never dad in rooms like this, strode from cluster to cluster with his baritone tuned to triumph. Our Michael, he told a banker, has a promotion lined up and the keys to a new house. Someone said future like an inheritance. Michael, starched and gleaming, drifted in a tux that fit like privilege. When I came near, Richard's tone thinned. "And this is our little soldier," he added with the breezy pity of a footnote. The words drew soft smiles, a pearl hand squeeze on my elbow, a whispered brave like an antique label. Inside, chandeliers broke light into obedient shards. Round tables, crisp menus, place cards spelling haze, as if the font conferred destiny. Elaine floated a step behind Richard, collecting glasses, her smile folding when he called her name. I moved the perimeter, charting constellations of approval. Everywhere I looked, Michael burned at the center. I orbited as the cold planet I'd been assigned. Relatives I barely knew offered compliments shaped like condolences. "How brave a woman in pearls," breathed as if addressing a museum piece. Someone else murmured desk job with the soft certainty of gossip passed, like heirloom china. Heat pressed through the tent seams. Beyond the hedges, the ocean flashed like a medal. I thought of years no one here would name grit under my nails, metal rooms that hummed, doors that closed like oaths. None of it translated. Here, value wore cufflinks and arrived with fanfare. Silver met crystal. The room tilted toward silence as Richard rose, one palm lifted. He didn't need a microphone. He had practice. To Michael, he began the pride of our family, the embodiment of discipline and success. He has earned not only this moment but his future as the true heir to the Hayes legacy. His hand swept toward my brother and with a flick of the wrist past me as if brushing lint from the story. Applause swelled, obedient, eager, loud enough to make the chandeliers tremble. Michael bowed his head with a humility that photographed well. The band launched a bright tune as if the celebration couldn't afford to pause. The distance settled not as a wound, but as a fact. Once I had believed proximity might convert to recognition if I held my posture long enough. The lesson came slowly then, all at once. Some frames aren't built to include you. They are built to show you what you are not. Richard raised his glass higher, basking. To our Michael, he repeated, sealing the toast. The word heir fluttered through the crowd like confetti, settling on tuxedo shoulders and manicured hands. I reached for my water. Not wine, no permission granted, none required. The glass was cold, catching and fracturing chandelier light into tiny moving stars. I lifted it to my eyes and saw warped on the surface a version of the room that made sense, the blur of mouths, the practiced laughter. My brother framed at the center like a painting bought in advance. I raised the glass in a toast no one would see and let my mouth shape a smile no one would read. I didn't need their language. I had my own. I took a slow sip and let the cold unknot the heat in my throat, a private ceremony inside the public. One everyone else applauded. I held the glass steady, softly. One day, silence will be proof. The smell of new leather still haunts me, the day my brother's car keys cut my world in half. Summer air thick with honeysuckle pressed against the driveway, the hum of cicadas interrupted by a polished engine's purr. A bow the size of my torso sat on the hood of the black convertible. Cameras flashed. Richard clapped Michael's back as though forging him into gold. Elaine dabbed her eyes with a silk square, murmuring how fast children grow, though only one child was allowed to grow in full view. Michael's grin reflected off the windshield wide enough to claim the neighborhood. His friends whooped, tugging at the bow, inhaling the promise of freedom tied to horsepower and tinted glass. Richard's voice carried like scripture. 18 years old, a man at last. A haze deserves a proper beginning. Applause circled the driveway like moths to porch light. I lingered by the steps, fingers curled around my backpack strap. My shoes carried the dust of the school library where I had spent hours tracing options for a future Richard never planned for me. The smell of new leather floated even to where I stood, sweet and nauseating. I wanted to cover my nose, but I stayed still as though movement might erase me further. Elaine noticed me halfway. "Kate," she said softly, beckoning with her hand. Richard's glance silenced her before she could add more. He turned back to the spectacle, narrating Michael's scholarship letters, his offers, his boundless promise. The convertible gleamed under his words, black paint swallowing the afternoon sun. When the crowd thinned, I drew courage like a breath and stepped forward. Richard was alone by the hood, admiring the shine. My voice barely cleared my throat. "Dad, I need $500. His head tilted, eyebrow raised as though he hadn't heard. "For a prep course," I explained, pressing the words before they could scatter. "It could help me apply." His hand sliced the air. "We can't afford everything for everyone." The sentence struck harder than the summer heat. Everything for everyone. Behind him, the car glistened, leather interior, waiting for Michael's hands, music already imagined pouring from the speakers. $500 was too much for me, but a convertible was essential for him. I swallowed. My tongue tasted iron. Elaine shifted near the doorway, lips parted as though to speak, but closed them again. Her silence joined mine. Richard stepped away, calling for Michael, pressing the keys into his son's palm with theatrical weight. The sound of metal landing in Michael's hand echoed in me like a verdict. Michael whooped, sliding into the driver's seat, the leather groaning in surrender. Engine roared, my request vanished under the sound. He revved once, twice, then pulled out to the cheers of his friends. Gravel sprayed my shoes. I stared after the taillights until the road turned them into embers. Something cold and precise settled in me, then not despair, but a vow. If $500 was too much, I would find my own way. No one would give me escape. I would carve it with my own hands. The driveway emptied, the bow crumpled in the heat. Richard disappeared inside, satisfied. Elaine brushed past me with her perfume of lilies and resignation. "Don't take it personally," she whispered, though her eyes warned she knew it was impossible. I stepped closer to the convertible, still parked in the shadows of the garage after its first triumphant spin. The surface was flawless, so polished it carried my reflection like a warning. I leaned in, saw my face warped across perfect paint. Not heir, not golden, not chosen, just the daughter in the background. The smell of leather filled my lungs again. My breath fogged the glass, but the car's surface remained immaculate, unbothered by me. In that reflection, I saw exactly what Richard had declared: I was insignificant, an extra line in a story already written. And yet, in that mirror darkness, I also saw a sliver of resolve. If they wouldn't give, I would take the silence and shape it. The car gleamed. My face stared back, thin but unbroken, my reflection in the polished car window realizing my insignificance. When the acceptance letter arrived, I thought I had won for one foolish second. Late afternoon light laid a ruler across the Hayes kitchen, measuring tile and paper and breath. Lemon cleaner lingered with warm cake from the oven. I stood at the table with the envelope cupped in both hands, paper warm, where I'd carried it against my ribs. The clock counted like marching boots. I wanted them to hear it too, the cadence of a life finally choosing me. I smoothed the letter flat until the seal flashed. Navy ROTC, I said, finding heir. 4-year scholarship, report date included. The words felt like a door unlatching. I imagined the room turning toward it. Richard looked up over the rim of his glasses, business section half folded. Michael leaned against the refrigerator, wrist deep in a chip bag, phone blue against his grin. Elaine turned flower dust bright on her sleeve, hope trembling in her smile. The Navy. What a waste. Richard dropped the paper as if punctuation had weight. "You're bright. Stay close. Get a sensible degree. I can make calls. The military is. He flicked his fingers, mining for a gentle synonym to carry a sharp edge. Not where your potential belongs. Heat rose and steadied. It's a leadership track, I said. Tuition covered, commission on graduation. It's what I've been working toward. Michael made a noise meant to be laughter. Boot camp chic, he said, scrolling. When do they shave your head? Elaine reached for my wrist as if touch could anchor me to tile. Tears filmed her eyes. Why must you go so far? The letter lay there, an honest line on a table that had never drawn one for me. Beyond the window, the backyard maple held its green like a held breath. I pictured mornings before light rooms that hummed orders clean as glass, consequence belonging to me. A horizon not fenced by another man's pride. Richard pushed the scholarship back with 2 fingers. You don't know what you're doing. People who go into the service need structure they can't build on their own. His smile was thin and fatherly. Be careful not to run from your opportunities. Run. The only running I knew was toward. I had stacked hours at the diner, tutored freshmen, traded sleep for practice tests. No one noticed. Work didn't need an audience. I'm not running, I said. I'm choosing. The words settled into the room, level and exact. Elaine stood between us like a soft barrier. Think about Sunday dinners, she whispered. Holidays. Your brother. Us. Michael finally pocketed his phone. Don't make this dramatic, he said, crumpling the bag closed. You'll change your mind once you see what it's really like. I slid the award page forward so the numbers found the light tuition housing books. 0 cost to you. I did not list the other ledger hours, shifts, calices, because some languages cannot be translated for people who refuse a dictionary. The Navy, what a waste. He tried the phrase again, slower, as if repetition could turn decision into phase. He pushed the envelope back toward me the way one returns a brochure from a stranger at a stoplight. You'll regret it. The clock ticked. The cake cooled. I felt the kitchen's arrangements, the knife block-aligned plates, the rolls stacked as neatly, and saw where I had been sorted. Every tool in this house had a slot. I lifted the letter. It felt heavier now, ink sunk deeper as if committing itself. I could feel the shape of my future by touch alone, not the family firm, not the orbit of a son's convenience, but a corridor opening to work, where merit was the only password. If they would not be proud, they could be irrelevant. Elaine's voice arrived a final time, small and earnest. Please, stay. We can figure out a plan. I looked at her and wished love were the same thing as help. It wasn't. Help had terms. Love ought to have none. I let the wish go. The kitchen waited, bright and indifferent. Unmoved. Still. I fold the letter silently, vowing to stop seeking approval. They told relatives I filed papers in an office while I briefed generals behind closed doors. The day began with a badge beep and a rush of cold air. In a windowless room, screens glowed blue over a coastline tourists never see. I stood at the lectern, rank still young on my chest, and walked the table through the picture assets, weather signal gaps, the narrow hour when everything aligned. Questions came crisp. A 2-star leaned forward. Bottom line, Lieutenant Hayes. I traced the corridor, the risk, the why now. He nodded once. Pens moved. The plan breathed. We filed out in a quiet that felt like respect. A captain squeezed my shoulder. Then the elevator doors shut. By evening, I was in Virginia again, the same dress I wear when I need to disappear. Richard had assembled cousins and colleagues around a table crowded with roast chicken and prestige. I took the chair at the margin. Someone asked where I worked now. Richard smiled with magnanimous boredom. She has a small government desk job, he said, a phrase tailored for guests who prefer their women useful and quiet. Paperwork mostly. Important to her, of course. A relative patted my wrist and told me how noble clerical work can be. Michael waited for his cue and got it. Richard raised a glass. To Michael's raise, he declared a recognition of promise. Just the first step. The toast traveled the table. Someone asked about the house he was touring next week. Richard said the neighborhood had gates. The word lingered like a compliment. I let the sound pass over me the way rain slicks stone, leaving it wet, but not altered. My work phone vibrated quiet and insistent. Movement order pending, it read. Stand by for deployment window. The room tilted not from fear, but from purpose, clicking into place like a bolt. Richard kept slicing the story. We're very proud, he told an uncle. Michael will carry the Hayes legacy. He understands responsibility. He'll be the heir that house deserves. Elaine's smile wavered when it met my eyes, then steadied under habit. It would have been easy to correct the record, to pour truth on the linen until the dye set. But truth does not need anyone's appetite. It keeps its own time. I let their version stand thin as tissue. The cousins wanted details that made sense to them. Was the office downtown summers off celebrities in D.C.? I answered with small nods and smaller words. My mind already back in the blue glow, running checklists counting the hours between now and wheels up. My water sweated. Michael's bourbon did not. Richard's hand landed on my shoulder with a pat that pretended to be paternal. You should move back, he said. I could place you at the foundation, steady hours, real influence. You'd make a fine liaison if you learned to be more presentable. Presentable, the word for settings and suns. From my pocket, the device pulsed again. Movement order confirmed. Check secure channel. Elaine saw the flicker and misread it. Sweetheart, she whispered, don't mind your father. He's excited for Michael. It's his moment. As if moments were a river and I was forbidden the bank. I stepped onto the porch where night gathered cool around the hedges and checked the channel coordinates, time on target, the quiet grammar of people who practice importance instead of announcing it. The door opened. Voices spilled out. Raises gates heir. I put the device away and returned to my chair. Dessert arrived with sparklers. Richard cut the cake as if distributing rank. Plates slid to Michael first, then rightward by seniority. Mine came last, a precise sliver. I did not tell them where I would be tomorrow, or what runway would swallow and return me in another season. They would say I was absent again, that I chose the wrong rooms. They could have the chorus. I had the score. When the laughter peaked about bonuses, about gates, about the proper number of garage bays for a man with ambition, the sound thinned to a brittle brightness. I folded my napkin, set it down, and looked at the people who would never read me even if I wrote myself on the wall. Let them laugh. Laughter will choke them. The cream-colored envelope wasn't an invitation, it was a summons to the final act. I found it on the doormat, my name looped in a script that pretended intimacy. I carried it to the kitchen counter and stood with the window cracked to the city, the faint siren braid, the metro's distant sigh, spring light rinsing the street a clean green. I slit the flap and let the heavy paper breathe in my hands. Michael and his fiancée smiled from a glossed insert. The type was ceremonial, the venue, a Virginia resort I could reach with my eyes closed. Rehearsal, dinner, ceremony, reception times. Dress codes, valet, a map whose arrows herded guests toward approved joy. I set it down and felt recognition, not shock, moving through me like tide. This wasn't an invitation. It was the latest scene in a play I no longer performed. Memory answered on cue. A driveway ribboned around a black convertible. Keys fell into a palm that was always open. A kitchen table where a scholarship letter met a patronizing verdict. Rooms where I was introduced as useful but small, our little soldier, while the word heir traveled the air like a coronation. The card didn't invent that weather. It forecast the same conditions. Beside it, my encrypted phone rested face down in its charger, dark and disciplined. Its stillness was the kind I trusted, the pause before movement, the held breath before the order to go. I tapped the case with a knuckle. If it rang during a toast, I would leave a toast midair. If it rang under a canopy of lilies, I would step through their sweet choke without looking back. My life moved by different lights than chandeliers. I rinsed a mug listening to water bead on porcelain. The apartment wore my habits boots by the door, a row of books on oceans and weather, a framed runway under a steel-shouldered sky. On the closet rod hung the dresses that turned me politely invisible. Behind them, one color weighted the exact navy of a decision I had stopped postponing. Attend or decline the sanctioned boxes. I poured water, felt the glass cool my palm, and considered a third. Attend, refuse the script, and allow truth to walk in at its own pace. No speeches, no scenes. Presence would be enough. The fuse had been burning for years. I only had to stop cupping my hand around the ember to keep other people comfortable. The phone hummed once, a routine systems check. Even so, the vibration tightened the air like piano wire. I pictured linen-draped tables, lilies aligned in military rows, Richard's baritone tuned to victory, Michael framed at the center of every camera. I heard the question that always migrated from table to table: what does she even do exactly? And I watched the answer arrive without argument, a fact with its own gravity. I picked up the card again. The RSVP line looked like a dare. I opened the link and typed my name, no +1. The past had supplied enough witnesses. In the bedroom, I drew the navy gown from its hanger, fabric, cool line, simple color, exact. I laid it on the bed, where late light warmed the wall. Next to it, I placed the phone screen, black weight, certain a small, unmoving engine. Two worlds parallel, intersecting on purpose. For a minute, I stood and let the clock keep time. Rain threaded the window in fine silver stitches. Soft rain ticked on the sill. Calm settled, the kind that comes after a decision is already made. I smoothed the dress, then woke the phone to watch the lock screen flare and sleep, a quiet rehearsal of readiness. The invitation waited by the lamp, face up, confident. I turned it over. Gratitude wasn't required. Preparation would do. I answered my own RSVP: I will attend, and I will not argue with anyone about who I am. Let the room polish its performance. Let the speeches preen. I will bring presence and patience, and I will not move first. I wouldn't light the match. I'd let them see the fuse. Every betrayal leaves fingerprints if you're patient enough to dust for them. The words circled in my head as I sat alone in my office after hours, the Potomac a black ribbon outside the window. The rest of the building had gone silent hours ago. Lights dimmed, desks empty, the hum of the HVAC my only companion. My screen glowed pale against the dark line after line of estate records scrolling in front of me, every date and figure a breadcrumb that refused to stay buried. I had carried the cream-colored envelope into this room days earlier, and with it a decision. If I was going to walk into that wedding, I would not walk empty-handed. I would bring with me something stronger than resentment, truth set down in ink and ledger lines. Richard had always relied on the silence of others. I would build my arsenal from the words he himself had left behind. The Hayes estate was large, sprawling farmland turned to parcels, trust funds, woven across decades. Buried within the glossy surface was movement properties, reassigned accounts, shifted value, siphoned into companies no one ever questioned. I requested access through secure archives, entering codes I had memorized with the discipline of habit. Every click carried risk, but risk was the only currency I trusted. Still here, Hayes. A low voice cut through the quiet. Liti Ramirez leaned in the doorway, jacket slung over one arm. He wasn't family, and that was exactly why I trusted him. He closed the door behind him, lowering his voice. I heard what you were pulling from the system. You'll need clearance extensions for some of those records. Lucky for you, I don't sleep much. He set his bag down and pulled a chair close. Together we combed through PDF scans, faded signatures, notarized seals. Ramirez tapped a finger on one screen. See here, transfer of deed, family land sold to a company with no board, just one director. Michael Hayes. His mouth twisted. Shell Corp. Clean on paper, rotten underneath. My chest tightened. Richard's voice seemed to echo through the pages, though he wasn't in the room. I could almost hear his toast, his practiced certainty that Michael was the heir, the future, the son worth betting everything on. Now the math spoke his language. Millions shifted like weights on a scale all tilted toward one name. I copied each document into an encrypted drive, layering password over password until the folder became a quiet arsenal. I labeled them not with names, but with numbers, date stamps, coordinates. If anyone ever sees the files, they would see only noise. But to me, it was music, the steady percussion of proof accumulating one beat at a time. Ramirez's stretched eyes rimmed red. "You're playing a dangerous game, Kate. Dig too deep and someone will notice." He handed me a flash drive. "Back this up off-site. Trust me." His words carried the weight of someone who had seen careers collapse over less. "I don't need them to notice," I said quietly, watching a bar fill as another scan transferred. "I just need them to see it when it matters. I won't force the fire. I'll only set the fuse where they can't pretend not to see." Hours passed and patterns surfaced. The estate's accounts had become a private river diverted into channels Michael alone controlled. In one folder scanned from the mid-2000s, I found handwriting, not a ledger, not typed, but Richard's own pen pressed into lined paper. My throat tightened as I read, "Michael, this is for you alone, your sister need not know." The words might as well have been a verdict. They confirmed what silence had always suggested: I had never been considered part of the equation. I copied the note last, sliding it into the encrypted vault. My arsenal was growing line by line, signature by signature. One day the weight would shift and they would choke on the balance they thought invisible. The office had gone so quiet that the hum of the screen sounded like static. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes. Ramirez already gone. I thought I was alone until the sudden buzz on my desk cut through the calm. My personal phone, not the encrypted line, rattled against the wood. An unknown number glared at me, digits unfamiliar. The message lit up in stark letters: "Stop digging." The screen dimmed, but the words burned on. Sometimes the smallest spark can smoke out the fire. Richmond brunches were theater sunlight on brick pitchers of mimosas sweating beside platters heavy with fruit and pastry. The family gathered on my aunt's wide patio, crepe myrtles scattering pink across the linen. It was the week of Michael's wedding, which meant every meal was another rehearsal for praise. I sat near the end, half in shadow, where the chatter reached me like background music. I remembered the warning text that had arrived days earlier: "Stop digging." Its silence still hummed in my pocket. I hadn't replied. I chose instead to turn patience into a weapon. If they wanted me silent, it meant I already knew enough to make them nervous. The table flowed with talk of venues, flowers, flights. Richard conducted it like an orchestra, details delivered as triumphs, his tone crisp with certainty. Then an uncle, casual as weather, asked whether the family estate parcels would indeed be donated to the charitable foundation as rumored. Richard smiled as if photographed. "Of course. Everything is proceeding. Michael will see it through. Legacy requires guardianship." His hand rested proudly on my brother's shoulder. I reached for a scone, my voice light. "Has the accountant reconciled last year's taxes?" Michael froze for a fraction of a second. The pause was small, but it tasted like truth. He forced a chuckle, eyes on his plate. "Routine work. Nothing unusual." Richard's eyes flickered, then softened into performance. "There's no need for you to trouble yourself, Catherine. It's all in good hands." I cut the scone neatly. "Of course. I only asked because accountants sometimes get creative when shell companies are in play." The word landed like a stone on water. Michael's hand slipped, his coffee tipped, streaking the white cloth. He laughed too loudly, blotting furiously with his napkin. "Clumsy of me." Richard waved it away with smooth authority, but the lines near his temple betrayed the effort. He shifted the table's current toward safer waters: honeymoons, flights, weather. Relatives followed obediently, grateful to resume the script. I sat back, watching sunlight glance off the glasses, hearing laughter braid itself into a cover. Elaine moved quickly, distributing napkins, soothing with small gestures. Her eyes brushed mine once wide and unsettled, before slipping away as though even looking was dangerous. Conversation circled back to Michael's engagement, the proposal story retold with polished beats. He basked in the retelling, and Richard provided the final line he plans as well as he executes. Applause came on cue. I refilled my glass of water and thought of the records stored in encrypted drives back in DC, the ledgers that told another story, the handwriting that had given him everything but erased me with a single sentence. The table sparkled with chatter, but beneath it I heard only the sound of pressure building. When dessert arrived, grapefruit brulee, the sugar crackling under a torch, applause came again. Michael joked about calories, Richard raised another toast. I smiled thinly, marking how praise flowed in predictable rivers, how silence could still carve its own canyon. As chairs scraped back and plates were gathered, I slipped toward the cooler side of the yard where the air smelled faintly of hose water and grass. Elaine followed the silk of her dress, whispering against the brick. She reached for cups, hands trembling slightly, her gaze darting as though the very air could betray her. Her voice was a thread only I could hear. Elaine whispers later, "How did you know those words?" The boardroom smelled of leather and fear, and none of it was mine. The September sun poured hard light through the tall windows of the Hayes Foundation's headquarters, gilding the mahogany table that had witnessed decades of signatures, handshakes, and carefully staged photographs. Today, though, its polish felt less like pride and more like a mirror reflecting secrets. I adjusted the cuffs of my navy jacket and sat where they had placed me, a single chair on the far side, the supposed observer. Richard presided at the head of the table, silver cufflinks glinting like weapons. Michael lounged beside him, tie perfectly knotted, confidence radiating in controlled bursts. Around them, the trustees settled with guarded smiles, shuffling papers that seemed heavier than their weight. Lawyers leaned against the wall, pens, poised, eyes flicking like metronomes. The agenda began predictably. Richard extolled the Foundation's legacy, citing numbers in booming cadences. Michael chimed in with his plans for growth, property expansions, new ventures. Words about philanthropy floated sterile and slick. I let them speak, every syllable weaving the noose tighter. When the talk shifted to allocations of estate holdings, silence pressed against the windows. That was when I leaned forward, my voice measured. Before we finalize these distributions, perhaps we should reconcile the discrepancy between declared assets and recorded deeds. Heads turned. A trustee blinked, another fiddled with his glasses. Michael's smile didn't falter, but his knuckles whitened against the leather armrest. Richard cleared his throat. Discrepancy. There is none. Everything has been reviewed thoroughly. I opened the folder before me, not spilling its contents, not yet. Just enough to let the crisp edges whisper against the table. The public filings suggest otherwise. Certain parcels, once part of the Foundation, appear in private entities. Shell entities, to be precise. The word shell rolled through the air like a thunderclap. One trustee coughed. Another leaned back, eyes narrowing. Michael jumped in smoothly, his tone calm but pitched a little too high. Routine structuring, common practice. You're misinterpreting data that requires context. I held his gaze unblinking. Context is useful. Transparency, however, is vital. Transparency protects us all. The trustees shifted their pens, stilled. For the first time, the air in the room leaned toward me, if only by a fraction. Michael drummed his fingers once, then stopped. I let the silence grow roots. Then closed the folder again. Documents still sealed, their presence undeniable, but their contents unread. I wanted them to feel the weight of what I could unleash without releasing it. Power lived not in the reveal, but in the restraint. Richard's voice broke the stillness, jagged with fury, barely masked. This is a distraction. My daughter. She has always dramatized matters beyond her comprehension. A trustee glanced at me apologetically, but not all their eyes followed Richard's cue. Doubt had entered the room thin as smoke curling into every crevice. I leaned back, folding my hands neatly. Distractions fade, records do not. The meeting pressed onward, but the cadence had shifted. Michael's confident gestures grew sharper, his explanations quicker, less fluid. The trustees listened, but not with full faith. Suspicion had been planted, and suspicion grows quickly when watered by silence. I didn't need applause. I only needed their unease. As the meeting adjourned, papers shuffled with urgency, chairs scraped more loudly than courtesy allowed. Trustees avoided my eyes, but some lingered just long enough for me to notice hesitation tugging at their composure. Richard remained seated, jaw locked, staring at the folder I carried. He didn't care what the trustees suspected. He cared that I had spoken at all, that I had punctured his stage with a single needle of truth. As I gathered my bag, he leaned forward, voice low, venomous enough for only me to hear. Richard glares, muttering, "We should have cut you out years ago. For every truth I unearthed, they buried me twice over." October bared the courthouse to bone skeletal trees, pale sky paper wind. Inside, fluorescence bleached halls. I sat beside Capty. Mercer. His pad was a trench map of dates. Across the aisle, the prosecutor arranged exhibits like relics, focused as a man promised a win. Alleged misuse of classified access, the clerk intoned. The charge loved passive voice, as if it had picked me at random. Michael slipped into the back row, smirk holstered like punctuation. Richard didn't show. Absence in his hands functioned like choreography. The prosecutor glided. Latin. Hayes accessed secure data outside scope, then leveraged it for personal financial advantage. He lifted a chart and let silence do the rest. Gallery rustled, half gasp, half appetite. Mercer rose. Speculation dressed as structure, he said evenly. No transfers to her accounts, no comms to outside beneficiaries, no chain of custody breach. Timing is not motive. He held up a cleaner chart whose lines were honest and dull. If evidence existed, they'd show it. Proof wasn't the goal. Mud was. They paraded coincidences as convictions: a login after midnight, a visit to a DC bank, a title search. A still of me entering a vault lobby flashed, fatigue jacket zipped to my throat. Spy fiction draped over errands. In gallery, Michael pretended to admire the molding. Somewhere in this building, I could feel Richard's pressure on a hidden doorframe, influence moving like a draft. Mercer objected, then objected again. Overruled. The prosecutor dropped a phrase with calculated care, a concerned community leader. Richard's alias when he wanted interference to smell civic. Back on the record, the judge questioned both sides with weathered calm. Mercer framed my midnight access as standard when deadlines rule time and authenticated logs that do not care who approves them. The judge nodded the way stone nods to rain. The gallery sweetened, disgraced before it was spoken. I looked at my hands and saw old work rope burns faded to pale dashes, the hatch scar from Norfolk. Rooms returned, the ones where stakes weren't performative, where voices carried weight, because they had carried burdens. No slideshow could account for that ledger. It exists without applause, and endures without rumor. The ruling arrived without theatrics. Pending review, the court recommends suspension of Latent Hayes' clearance. Recommended the kind of word that ruins politely. Pens moved. Whispers landed like ash. We stood, and Mercer stacked our notes with soldierly precision. "We appeal immediately," he said under the noise. "Delays hurt, but they aren't defeat." His eyes knew the truth in my world. Time is a weapon, and someone had just sighted down the barrel. Outside, the day had gone metallic. I walked until the building became geometry behind me. By a bare-limbed tree, wind stitched cold through my coat. I opened my palm and let my metal sit there, a small circle that remembered better rooms. Cabs hissed. A pigeon corrected twice. The air smelled of stone and rain of ink drying on orders. I considered the design of the blow, not to convict, only to contaminate. not to prove, only to plant rot in trust. The allegation would travel faster than facts, knocking on offices ahead of me and leaving fingerprints I could never lift. Richard would call it stewardship. Michael would call it inevitable and grin as if inevitability were talent. I put the metal back and felt the hinge close like a vow. If they vandalized my name with rumor, I would not debate in the hallway where echoes sharpen lies. I would study the room. Move the air, make silence do work. Let their story exhaust itself on a stage I refuse to enter. They want silence. I'll weaponize it. The lock clicked, and with it the balance of power shifted. The vault corridor held a chill engineered rather than cold metal in the air carpet, swallowing footfall fluorescent bars humming without fatigue. A clerk in a dark vest guided us past numbered doors. Ramirez kept half a pace behind me, jacket unbuttoned, attention moving like a sentry's breath. At the counter he compared signatures, checked my ID twice, and produced a ledger. Polite, precise, he ushered us to a booth no larger than a ship's head. Even privacy came bolted to the floor. The safe deposit drawer arrived on a low cart. I slid it free. Inside, a single ivory envelope waited where I'd left it, sealed with tape I had scored to detect tampering. Across the front, my block letters, "For when silence breaks." Ramirez closed the door and took the angle nearest the hinge, a human bracket between now and later. I lifted the flap with a practiced knife stroke. Paper exhaled. Notarized affidavits lay on top, stamps raised like small scars. They described transfers that wore charity as costume foundation parcels, diverted through entities that collapsed into Michael's name if you followed the filings. Each page had a spine, a quiet oath under glass. Beneath the stack lay a compact recorder in a clear evidence sleeve. Ramirez looked away on purpose. I pressed play. Static lifted. Ice clinked. A room assembled from sound. Then Richard's baritone arrived, unworried, the tone of a man whose walls love him. "Sign it," he said. "Move the parcel under the new entity." "Yes, that one. Michael will hold it for now." A soft laugh. "It's for him alone, your sister need not know." I let the voice run long enough to map its confidence, then clicked stop. The booth felt smaller, not with fear, but with accuracy. Facts shrink space for excuses. I returned the device to its sleeve and felt my pulse even out. Ramirez exhaled. "Once this is out, there's no return." "I know. Proof doesn't require volume, it requires timing." I restacked the affidavits, aligned their corners, and felt certainty settle like weight into a keel. The courthouse had tried to hand me silence as punishment. Here, silence became pressure stored, directed, patient. Chain of custody clean. Dated, witnessed, logged. Copies off-site. Relief crossed his face in a flicker, professional, not personal. A door sighed somewhere in the corridor. I resealed the envelope, taping over my instruction. For when silence breaks. Not drama, a schedule. I slid the envelope back into the drawer and let my palm rest on steel, marking the moment like a sailor tapping a bulkhead before watch. We returned the drawer to the cart. The clerk logged the time and guided us to the lobby. Marble reflected us into pale twins. Ramirez adjusted his cuffs. "Use gravity," he said. "Don't shove, make them fall." "I won't shove." My reflection steadied. "I'll stand still." He nodded and let the turnstile claim him. The building accepted its quiet again. At the counter, I signed the ledger and returned the key. "Thank you," the clerk said, routine and remote. Outside, the afternoon cooled to something exact. Traffic threaded past. A siren tested distance and lost interest. I stood under the stone cornice and let Richard's sentence repeat. "It's for him alone. Your sister need not know." I did not flinch. A fact held correctly is a compass. It points with or without permission. I looked back at the place where the lock had yielded. The balance had shifted, not because I made it louder, but because I stacked weight until gravity remembered its job. I turned toward the crosswalk and matched my pace to the city's. The envelope could sleep. The fuse did not need my breath. I kept walking steady as a metronome. Steady pace. Not yet. They'll damn themselves first. The gavel struck, but the sound felt like glass cracking. November light flattened the district court's marble to bone and ash. I sat with Mercer at counsel table. Across the aisle, Richard conferred with his attorney as if discussing whether not the estate. Michael took the second row close enough to be seen far enough to claim neutrality. Elaine sat at their edge, hands clasped, as if she could hold the room together. Case on countersuit allegations of estate fraud, the clerk read. The judge settled. When my name was read, lenses blinked. We began with numbers. Mercer laid out dates, deeds, transfers, plain scaffolding. Line items that do not align, he said, tilting a page so the light caught seals. We did not show everything. We showed enough to dent the shine. Richard's counsel rose. Misinterpretations, he said smoothly. Routine restructuring for tax efficiency. He gestured to a glossy chart where arrows flowed like a healthy river. Beneficiaries have not been harmed. They have benefited from prudent stewardship. I stood tone level. The river on that screen has tributaries that vanish on paper. Charitable parcels appear months later under private entities that share officers with the allocators. Signatures shift. Dates slide. Efficiency is not the pattern. Disappearance is. The judge leaned forward. Documentation, yes. I lifted a binder, opening it just enough to show tabs and weight. First, deeds whose signatures cannot agree with themselves. Second, bank interactions mapping to those slide rule restructurings. I let the page breathe, then closed it. Restraint can be louder than spectacle. Richard's jaw tightened. Michael affected boredom, but his foot kept time. Elaine's eyes met mine, not pleading, asking whether I was certain. I let her see that I was. Her posture softened like cloth after a door shuts. Defense widened the lens. Look at the Foundation's Mission Council urged. Community grants gala coverage audited praise. They sold the frame. I pointed at the canvas. The judge asked, where precisely have the assets gone to entities with no charitable purpose? Mercer said. I passed him a captioned exhibit. He slid it to the clerk. The envelope stayed sealed, but the caption carried gravity. Reporters leaned forward. I had not planned to play the recording, but rumor outpaces fact. When the court asked for any direct statements of intent, I nodded. A small speaker arrived. The room narrowed, static. A clink of ice. Richard's baritone assured, move the parcel under the new entity. Michael will hold it for now. I stopped the clip there, no more than a breath enough to tilt the frame. Objection, Foundation context. Sustained in part. Possibly relevant, the judge said. Fine. I hadn't come for a verdict in an hour. I had come to introduce heir. We pressed no farther than plan allowed. A few deeds to fix the question. A sketch of discrepancies. Witness reserved. Date set. The gavel fell again. A crack ran hairline through the gallery's composure. In the corridor, sound-swelled heels on stone ballast hum the appetite of press. Flashers ticked. Microphones rose. Richard's attorney tried to funnel him to a side door. Michael drifted after and met two cameras and an aunt with a selfie stick. Elaine was ringed by people saying shocking while offering consolations that sounded like weather. I kept my pace even and my answers cooler than they wanted. Do you feel vindicated? Someone asked. Another voice. Are you alleging crime? I repeated that evidence would be weighed in court, that I respected the process, that this was a family matter in a legal forum, not a spectacle for the steps. A boom mic grazed my shoulder. A heel clipped my shoe. Cold leaked through the doors. The crowd surged. Elbows became edges. The staircase turned into a funnel that compressed breath into steam. At the threshold, light flared and questions stacked a demand to choose blood or truth on camera. I did not oblige. I tucked my chin, kept moving, and watched the microphones regroup as we spilled onto the plaza. Reporters surge outside. Colonel Hayes, are you accusing your own father? Every lie they told now had a witness, and it wasn't me. December iced the courthouse into angles. The trial resumed. Oath docket, the hiss of heat. Cameras waited back, tethered by a bailiff. I sat with Mercer, chain of custody sealed. The room would hear what the walls heard. Richard took the stand with composure starched to his collar. His lawyer led gently. I have nothing to hide, he said. Everything we've done serves the foundation. My family values integrity. Cross began with paper. Mercer walked him through deeds that disagreed with themselves, signatures that changed pressure on the same day. Richard smiled the veteran's smile at a novice. Then it showed teeth. Clerical anomalies, he said. Common. You're unfamiliar with volume. Let's reduce volume, Mercer said, setting a notarized affidavit on the rail. The trustee wrote clean sentences, dates, amounts, instruction to route parcels through an entity. In the gallery, a throat cleared, then went still. Richard denied knowledge. He denied instruction. Michael, he said, had done nothing beyond customary estate planning. His voice didn't crack. It calcified. This is offensive, he added. Testing indignation for fit, Audio, Mercer said. The clerk placed a small speaker. The judge warned the room to stay silent. I felt the vault booth return metal plastic inevitability. Static, a breath, ice in a glass, and then the voice that made my childhood sign it. Move the parcel under the new entity. Yes, that one. Michael will hold it for now. It's for him alone. Your sister need not know. No one moved. Objection, foundation, context, prejudice. Allowed for limited purpose. I did not need conclusions. I needed a sentence to sit beside sworn denials and taste different. Trustees took the stand. They watched the oath card, not me. Irregularities, one said. Directed reallocations, another allowed. Link by link, the corridor from my ledgers appeared on the record. Michael shifted in the second row. Stillness frayed. He watched his father watching the judge. When a trustee named the shell entity precisely, he laughed once too short and rushed to prove mastery. That LLC was only temporary, he blurted. Dad said it would dissolve after the easement cleared. The room inhaled. Mercer didn't smile. He turned slightly, offering Michael a cleaner path to the microphone he didn't have. Richard's head snapped. The movement was small and lethal. Michael swallowed, searched for retreat, found none he could name without drawing a map. Mr. Hayes, the judge said, level, you are not a witness. He nodded, but details spilled precise and panicked. The bank branch, the date, a deed refiled, the private domain used because the foundation addresses were too monitored. He tried to recast each fact as rumor, anything but what it was. His voice supplied timestamps our exhibits hadn't reached. A reporter's pen snapped. Elaine's hands rose to her mouth and stayed. Counsel demanded a recess. Mercer declined. The judge denied, weary and firm. Richard tried to rebuild the stage with a look. Charisma can move a crowd, not a timestamp. Affidavits don't admire, recordings don't fear. His son had set his corner on fire and narrated the color of the flames. The silence that followed was not the silence of my childhood assignments rehearsing the role of Les. This silence had edges. It cut toward truth and opened paths for people who had pretended not to see. Jurors sat straighter. Even the reporter's keys struck more surely, as if the story had stopped resisting its outline. Mercer closed his binder. No further questions, he said. I met Elaine's eyes and found comprehension, not apology. When she looked back at Richard, her gaze didn't plead. It measured. Richard asked to clarify. His lawyer tugged his sleeve. His mouth clicked shut. Power hadn't vanished. It had become visible, which is often the same as broken. The room stared at the chair where authority had sat and recognized furniture. The judge lifted the gavel. Reporters leaned forward. A cam word. Wood came down, the crack traveled, and private rehearsal became public act. Judge slams gavel order. This changes everything. When empires fall, the dust doesn't ask who built them. The driveway to the Hayes estate looked smaller, hedges suddenly modest under frost. Cars lined the gravel. Richard's spot sat empty. Inside, portraits watched like unemployed sentries. A secretary met me with a clipboard and a voice newly careful. The trustees gathered in the library, a room arranged to imply permanence. Leather creaked softly. Decanters glowed in sunlight. Today, air had the dryness of paperwork. Richard stood at the head of the table, jaw fixed. Michael hovered 2 seats down, tie like a tourniquet. I took a chair near the window and let the cold steady me. The agenda lasted 3 minutes, then motions stacked like stones. Removal freeze audit. Effective immediately, the chair said, Mr. Hayes is suspended from trustee duties pending final disposition. Papers slid. Pens moved. A second vote locked major assets. Counsel read the language without looking at the man it unseated. Michael cleared his throat to offer strategy. Resign, a trustee said. The word landed like furniture. He reached for protest, found only air, then signed the pen, squeaking louder than his courage. Elaine sat near the fireplace, hands at her sleeves, until a thread came loose. When we adjourned, she rose and followed Richard through the service corridor. I waited, then went after them, not for theater, but to be close when gravity finally did its job. They had chosen the flower room stone sink and winter light. Richard leaned on the lip, staring at the drain as if authority might pool there. Elaine shut the door and spoke as if the sentence had been tempered in a kiln. You destroyed us for a son who couldn't stand on his own. The words struck simple and exact. He groped for stewardship, legacy, the names he'd given appetite. None answered. He tried a smaller register, and then nothing at all. That was the fit ending, not handcuffs, not shouting silence. He had made me wear quiet like a stone. Now quiet built him a cell. I felt its bricks click into place. Back in the library, signatures cured. A notary stamped the last page. The sound made everyone blink. The chair thanked the room for candor and announced an outside audit within 48 hours. Phones stayed face down. No one wanted to frame the ruin. Michael waited by the side door with a bag, auditioning a look he'd never learned: contrition. Staff passed him without the old deference. Outside, thaw filmed the gravel. His reflection wrinkled, a man unfamiliar with his outline. Elaine found me in the hall. Her face looked newly arranged, as if the muscles had been given different instructions. I knew pieces, she said. Not the shape. I nodded. There are no honest consolations for architecture built to fall. I walked 1 loop of the house before leaving. The portraits kept their dignity. It belonged to oil and varnish, not us. In the mudroom, I paused at the peg where a child's coat once hung and imagined weight returning to it, then vanishing. Empires are stitched from such illusions. Dust is the tailor after. At the front steps, winter sun pared the marble to pewter. I thought of the clip, the affidavits, Michael narrating his own fire, and how fast a story admits its outline once the hands holding the mask are busy surviving. The lawn smelled faintly of water under cold. My phone buzzed. An email banner from a sender that never wasted words crossed the screen. Review complete. Additional assessment in progress. I didn't breathe until the signature block resolved, and the line beneath it said what the river building would do next. I received letter, Pentagon reviewing her suspension, possible reinstatement. Justice wasn't loud, it was the silence after applause fades. Arlington stretched in white and green rows of marble stones like soldiers standing watch forever. The grass had just begun to soften after winter. The air carried that faint copper tang of spring rain not yet fallen. I walked alone, boots grinding on gravel, until the familiar markers drew me in. Coins rested on some headstones, a ribbon on another. I pressed my palm to the stone of a friend and thought, honor is not the noise people make when they approve. Honor is steady work done without an audience. Ramirez appeared at my side, his steps respectful, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He didn't speak until I had lowered my hand. "You're not finished," he said. "They wanted silence to bury you. Don't let that be their final word." "My silence belongs to me again," I answered. "I decide what it says now." We walked the row together, quiet, until a small voice broke it. My cousin Tyler trotted ahead of his mother carrying a folded paper crane. He placed it on a stone that bore our surname, then looked up for approval. I saluted him gently. His grin softened into a solemn nod. For a moment I saw a future that didn't depend on inheritance but on example. Elaine's footsteps faltered before she reached me. She wore a pale scarf, eyes shifting from the stones to me. "I didn't know if I should come," she murmured. "But I needed to see where you are when you're not with us." "This is where the noise tells the truth," I said. She swallowed hard. I told myself I was keeping peace. But it wasn't peace, was it? It was silence. "Different things," I said simply. Ramirez drifted away, giving us space. Elaine faced me, eyes bright with a pain she had never spoken. "I can't defend him. And I can't defend myself. He silenced you your whole life," I joined him. "I was wrong." Her confession trembled in the air. "I let silence cradle it." "Then fear can look like loyalty," I said. "But truth doesn't disappear just because we hush it." She reached for my hand. I met her halfway. Her fingers were cold but steadier as they wrapped mine. A truce made not by words but by contact. Tyler's laugh rang out faintly, then quieted as if the day itself had reminded him to lower his voice. "I don't want revenge," I said. Justice was enough. I wanted the floor to stop tilting. Now it has. Elaine nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "What happens next? I wait," I told her. "For the doors that still matter to open." My eyes flicked toward Ramirez, who pretended not to listen, and then I stepped through. At the gates, Elaine paused by a marker, whispering something private to the stone. She turned back to me, voice unsteady. "Would it be all right if I came here with you sometimes?" "Come when you mean it," I said. "This place knows the difference." Ramirez joined us again, his eyes carrying quiet expectation. My phone vibrated twice in my pocket. I ignored it long enough to hear the wind rattle the flags along the rows. Elaine squeezed my hand once, whispering, "I won't be silent that way again." "I know," I said. Ramirez tipped his chin at my pocket. "Answer, Colonel. Or I will, and they won't know what to do with me." I pulled the phone free. The email header carried the Pentagon seal, clearance reinstated. Await further orders. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was whole. They once erased me with silence, now silence was the proof I had won. The courtroom was full, though no one moved. December sunlight filtered through tall windows, glinting against the polished wood, and the camera lenses lined along the back wall. The judge adjusted his glasses, voice even as he read the words that would end the empire my father had built on deception. On the charges of fraud, misappropriation of assets, and conspiracy to defraud the trustees, this court finds Richard Hayes guilty. Assets of the Hayes estate are to be seized and redistributed according to law. The Hayes Foundation will be restructured under independent oversight. Richard sat motionless. His once commanding posture sagged. His hands clutched the armrests as if they alone could hold him upright. Michael avoided his gaze, pale and ruined, the favored son stripped of title, inheritance, and illusion. Elaine wept silently in the second row, not for the empire but for the years she had lost to complicity. My name for once was spoken with respect. The judge continued. "The court acknowledges Colonel Catherine Hayes's integrity and service. Allegations of misconduct are vacated. Her reputation is restored." Applause swelled faintly, then faltered because it didn't belong here. Justice is not a performance. It is a reckoning. Cameras flashed. Reporters prepared their questions like drawn arrows. But for me, the verdict was already whole. When the session adjourned, I walked past Richard. He didn't raise his eyes. Silence wrapped him like chains. Michael shifted as if to speak, but no words came. That was their prison, the very quiet they once wielded against me. Outside the courthouse steps were a storm of microphones and voices. Questions rained down Colonel Hayes. What now? Do you forgive your family? What does this mean for the Foundation? I said nothing. Instead, I reached into my coat and pulled free the small case I had carried all this time. I opened it and lifted the metal, a ribbon of blue, a gleam of gold high enough for the cameras to catch. The noise swelled, then abruptly broke. The crowd, restless a moment before, fell into stillness. Even the reporters lowered their microphones. The metal caught the winter sun, scattering light across the faces before me. For the first time in my life, silence didn't erase me. It crowned me. Inside, I whispered words no one else could hear. My story didn't end with applause. It ended with quiet, and quiet was enough. The cameras clicked furiously, but none of their noise touched me. In that silence, I knew the legacy had been rewritten not by inheritance, but by endurance. And the silence at last was mine. I stood in that courtroom not for applause, but for truth. If you've walked with me through silence, betrayal, and the weight of being overlooked, then know this dignity is never granted, it is claimed. I ask you to see me not as a victim, but as proof that quiet persistence can outlast arrogance. To those who supported me, thank you. Your belief was the light in dark halls. My advice: never measure your worth by the voices that dismiss you. Let silence be your ally, not your cage, and one day it will echo as your victory.